If you are thinking about doing business in the UAE for the first time, then this video is for you. I'll be sharing with you some bite-sized general information which will hopefully help to give you some useful knowledge about the country, and then later on I'll move on to looking at some of the routes that you can take to enter the UAE market, all of which may be of interest to foreign investors, entrepreneurs and business people who are thinking about doing business in the UAE. This video is aimed at those who do not have an existing familiarity with the country or its business landscape, but are perhaps interested in exploring opportunities for doing business within the country. The UAE is undoubtedly a popular place for business and trade, and the country attracts foreign investors and business people from all over the world, so hopefully this video can be a useful point of reference for you. I should say that all information shared in this video is provided for general information purposes only and should not be relied upon as definitive or authoritative in any way. If you require information relative to your own circumstances, then it is always advisable to seek out specific professional advice, guidance or assistance. So let's begin with a short introduction to the country itself. The UAE was officially established on the 2nd of December 1971. The country is a constitutional federation made up of 7 emirates, namely Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Sharjah, Ajman, Al Quwain, Fujairah and Ras Al Khaimah. An emirate is similar to our understanding of a territorial state. By definition, it is typically a geographical or political territory that comes under the jurisdiction of a ruler, often known as an emir. The 7 emirates of the UAE are formally united together under the overarching leadership of the Federal Supreme Council and Council of Ministers. Each emirate enjoys a certain level of autonomy with its own local government, which has an ability to enact laws that apply across the emirate, insofar as these do not relate to matters reserved exclusively to the federal government. Certain legislative and executive authority is reserved exclusively to the federal government. In this way, you might consider it to be a bit similar to the federal state structure of the United States of America and other similar countries, where you have individual geographical or territorial states which can govern a designated territorial area within a country, however are ultimately united under the jurisdiction of an overarching federal authority or government. Abu Dhabi is the capital of the UAE and the seat of the federal government. Arabic is the official state language, however pretty much everyone speaks English and it serves as a common language amongst the country's population. As a result, a lot of business and trade is conducted in English. However, across the mainland, official documents used within a state or government related context will typically be in Arabic, and where these have been translated, precedence is given to the Arabic version. The nation's currency is called the UAE dirham and it is pegged to the US dollar. Business or working days typically run from Sunday to Thursday as part of a 5-day working week, with Friday and Saturday being the weekend. Some businesses work a 6-day week, with Friday being a day of rest in all cases. Public holidays are based on a lunar calendar and will normally be officially declared a day or two before they are anticipated, based on a sighting of the moon. The country is a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is commonly referred to as the GCC. The UAE enjoys an enviable and strategic geographical location. On the world map, the country sits in the middle of the major Western and Eastern world economies. Over the last 40 plus years, the country has undergone an incredible transformation from being a sparsely populated basic and regional trading hub in the Middle East and Gulf region to a highly developed modern day nation, a regional powerhouse and a global business hub with world-class infrastructure. The discovery of oil around the early 1960s helped pave the way for the rapid development of the relatively new country, enabled it to attract investment from all around the world, and subsequently led to a wide diversification of its economy. While the country's economy was originally centered around its oil and gas industry, propped up by its vast oil reserves, it has implemented effective policies and strategies over the years to allow it to diversify and develop a robust economy across many sectors, including shipping, transport, construction, energy, financial services, and of course tourism. The UAE is probably the most preferred investment hub in the Middle East, largely due to the steady development of its economy, the stability of its government and state institutions, and its commitment to enhancing the business environment within the country. Without a doubt, the country has a pro-business approach which has been underpinned by a clear focus on cultivating an attractive environment for business and trade. The country's huge economic growth and expansion over the last few decades has positively contributed towards an evolving social and economic landscape and brought about a modern-day burgeoning economy. This has also led to a growing and diverse population in the country. The current estimated population is around 9.5 million people, of which around 80 to 90% are expats. That is nearly double the amount of people in comparison to my home country of Scotland, which only has a population of around 5 million. The sheer diversity in the UAE is also immediately palpable the moment you arrive in the country, which is actually one of the things that I like most about it. So the country has become a destination of choice for people from all walks of life, including investors and businesses looking to expand overseas, especially into the Middle East or Gulf region and beyond. I hope that gives you a bit of an insight into the country itself. Let's now move on to looking at the commercial routes for entering the UAE market and doing business within the country. There are three main routes that can be taken. The first and perhaps most common route is to establish a physical presence in the country. This can be achieved by setting up a business on the UAE mainland, setting up in one of the free zones, or by setting up an offshore company in one of the UAE's offshore jurisdictions. Note that there are various different options for setting up a business on the UAE mainland, which I'll touch on a bit later. Now, whether you look at setting up on the mainland, in a free zone, or in an offshore jurisdiction, much will depend on the intended commercial activities of the business. This is one main factor that will help to determine where in the UAE might be the most suitable place to establish the business. There are certain advantages and limitations within each of these routes, too many to mention here, and if this is something that you might want to learn more about, then it is a good idea to consult with a legal advisor who can help you to understand what exactly these advantages and limitations are, and in turn help you to work out where would be best to establish your business in the UAE. Crucially, to establish a physical presence in the country, a business entity must be registered and licensed by a relevant licensing authority. Turning now to the second of the three highlighted routes. Number 2, setting up a commercial agency arrangement. If you would like to conduct business within the UAE but do not necessarily want to go down the path of establishing a physical presence in the country, then you can look at setting up a commercial agency arrangement. What this means is appointing a commercial agent to carry out business activities on your behalf. Under the UAE's laws, agency is defined as representation of the principal by an agent for the purpose of distribution, selling, display, or rendering of a commodity or service in the United Arab Emirates against a commission or profit. That gives you an idea of what this arrangement is all about. Again, there are certain advantages and limitations of commercial agency arrangements which should be considered before they are entered into. Some of the main advantages include a foreign business being able to tap into the experience and expertise of the local market and using this to gain a foothold in the market. And also certain restricted business activities can be conducted through a commercial agent, which perhaps would otherwise not be possible for the foreign business to do. One of the main drawbacks can be around terminating the arrangement. In practice, it is not always straightforward and can operate to the detriment of the principal while favouring the position of the agent. Again, for more information about this type of arrangement, obtaining expert advice is recommended. Note that commercial agents must be registered with the UAE Ministry of Economy and must be a UAE national or a UAE company that is wholly owned by UAE nationals. And another important point, a commercial agency agreement must be registered. It's worth reiterating that before entering into a commercial agency agreement, getting some advice on it is highly advisable. Also, sometimes these arrangements are entered into without the registration element. If this is done, it is likely to cause problems in the event of any dispute arising and therefore should be avoided entirely. And now moving on to the third highlighted route, freelancing. If setting up a separate business entity or a company is not feasible, either because of the costs and red tape involved, or because the business itself is small scale and essentially revolves around a person themselves, then freelancing is an option through an appropriate freelancer permit or license. There are a number of free zones that offer an option of a freelancer permit or license, which also include the ability to add a residence visa on top. This can be a fast and cost-effective way for an individual to set up a small business in the UAE and be able to lawfully live and work in the country. A usual requirement for a freelancer permit or license is that an educational qualification is normally required, such as a university degree, and the business activity normally needs to relate to that qualification. Freelancing is becoming more and more popular, and there are some particularly good options available in the market if this happens to suit your business circumstances. Alright, so these are the three main commercial routes that you can take to enter the UAE market and begin doing business within the country. Before I conclude this video, I want to quickly touch on the various options that exist for setting up a business on the UAE mainland. I mentioned this point earlier, and it's worth telling you a little bit more about this, as it is a question that comes up all the time. So a common misconception is that setting up a business on the mainland means setting up a limited liability company or a LLC. This is certainly one of the options, but not the only one. Here's a slide of some of the common mainland options. You can see that as well as a LLC setup, there are also other options such as a sole establishment, branch, rep office, branch of a free zone, and a civil company. In addition to this, there are other types of companies and entities that can be set up on the UAE mainland, such as joint liability companies and partnerships, and private and public joint stock companies. These are out with the scope of this video, so let's briefly discuss some of the more common options as shown in the slide. A LLC is probably the most popular structure for a mainland setup, along with a sole establishment. A LLC provides a degree of flexibility on its corporate structure, along with limited liability for its shareholders. They are generally analogous to, for example, limited companies in the UK in a broad sense, but with certain significant differences as a result of the laws that govern them. A sole establishment is similar to our understanding of a sole trader in the UK. It has a separate personality to some small limited extent, in that it can carry on business in its own name and has its own registration number, but not separate legal personality, which is the important point to note. And on the whole, is owned and controlled by an individual who assumes all its profits and losses and is responsible for its debts and obligations as well. With a branch or rep office, including a branch of a free zone, foreign businesses can set up a branch or rep office on the UAE mainland, with its parent company retaining 100% ownership. One important aspect of these setups is that the branch or rep office does not have a separate legal personality from the parent company, and therefore the parent company is responsible for the liabilities of the branch or rep office in the UAE. Finally, a civil company can be set up in some cases. These are for activities that are considered non-commercial by the relevant licensing authorities. They are also sometimes used for certain consultancy or professional activities. Some examples of its use are where two or more partners want to use it as a vehicle for providing consultancy services, or enter into a speculative venture partnership, for example with a view to entering into a speculative transaction, or engage in what is known as a mudarraba arrangement. This is where one party brings and contributes assets to the entity and the other party gives their time, work or effort to realise its aims or objectives. They are broadly similar to sole establishments in that they do not have separate legal personality from its owner, but can be owned by foreign nationals. So that is a broad overview of some of the more common options for setting up on the UAE mainland. Note that in addition to registering and becoming licensed by the relevant mainland authority, it can often be the case that external approvals need to be obtained from a federal or local government body, which is another process to complete before the business can be fully set up. Whether this is required will depend on the nature of the commercial activities of the business. I hope you found this video informative and that it gives you a bit of an introductory insight into the UAE, along with some helpful information on commercial routes that can be taken to enter the UAE market. I would add that there are various nuances to take into account when it comes to doing business in the UAE, and it's always a good idea to get an expert on board who can advise you and help guide you through it. If you are thinking about setting up a business in the UAE or expanding your existing business, then you can reach out to me for a chat about it and get some advice or assistance if you need it. Alright, that's it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching and see you next time.